Hi, everyone. It's V. Spear, the Director of Impact for the James Beard Foundation. I am so grateful that you all have joined us today with our special guest, Elizabeth Tilton of Oyster Sunday, who is coming to us from New Orleans. We are very lucky to have her here today sharing some strategies for building a reopening path. As always, we'll level it up with our disclaimer. What Elizabeth's going to offer today is some strategies that have worked for her and that she's been able to work with other clients successfully to build out. She's done a ton of research on the topic and is very well invested in this community. So if you hear something that resonates and sounds like that could work for you, go for it. If you hear something and you're like, you know what, that's not going to work for me, that is also okay. These aren't meant to be the be-all, end-all authority on how to reopen your restaurant concept and pretend to understand what the local economy is like where you specifically are. We just want to try and give some broad strokes to the conversation folks are having and clear away some of the fog as to like, what do we do now? So just keep that in mind as we're going along. It's just a friendly peer-to-peer conversation, and if something resonates, let us know. We will be doing more follow-ups on this. You'll likely see something on paths to reopening every week, if not a couple times a week, as we're getting closer and closer to that day when we can all finally start to create a new normal. So as always, we want this to be interactive. I'm going to pass it over to Emily, who's going to tell you how you can link up with us during this webinar.
Yes, thank you so much, and welcome back, everybody, and thank you all for coming. So like all of our past webinars, this one will also be recorded. You can access this recording and past recordings at jamesbeard.org/industry-relief-webinars. And we'll also send out a link to the recording after this, likely sometime tomorrow. We are going to save all of our questions for the end, but we know that sometimes things will come up as you're thinking about them. So as you have a question, just send it through using the question function or the chat function on the control panel. I'll be monitoring those and sending those all through, and we will try to get to everything. If you are having any technical difficulties, if you can't hear, if the audio is going in and out, please tell us because it might be happening to somebody else. I'm logged in as an attendee, so I can also keep track of some of those issues, but let us know if you're having some trouble with anything and we will help you troubleshoot that.
Great, thanks so much, Emily. And Elizabeth, I'm so glad to have you here as a member of the Women in Hospitality United board and a voice on leadership for women in the industry. Also former head of brand at W&P Design, PR for Momofuku. There's really no piece of the business that you haven't been able to kind of get your hands around. What's it been like in New Orleans over the last couple weeks?
I mean, initially it was we're seen as a hot spot down here. And so I think that the city at first, we take on a little bit of a laissez-faire attitude in general, and we embrace each other. I mean, it's our inclination to be hospitable and around one another. And I think pretty quickly that shut down. I keep joking that in the French Quarter, it looks like the rapture came and I missed the memo and it's really quiet and like music stopped and I'm like looking around, I was like, did no one just told me? But in general, I think that the city has, I was actually going to kind of touch on this in a little bit about where the future holds. But one thing that's very apparent is that there was a lot of lessons learned from Katrina. And I think that we're able to really kind of think through innovative ways of feeding one another, even if it requires at this point to be detached in a way and removed from one another. So, but I definitely will get to there. But I think that's it's overall pretty good, quiet and warm.
Yeah. Well, tell us about building this path to reopening.
Yeah, definitely. So I kind of wanted to first start off with some thank yous. And I also realized that when I was getting ready for this, that I poured myself some coffee and the one mug I decided to pick up was a rocket. So I'm sorry, and this is funny intro to this, but so you'll see plenty of it around the course of this document.
Probably whiskey.
Yeah. So in terms of,
we don't judge mugs.
Oh, good. In terms of going forward, so first off, thank you so much to the James Beard Foundation and to the Impact team for having us. V and Emily, thank you for coordinating this today. In reality, this fully takes a village, and there's plenty of people that beyond the Oyster Sunday team that we've contacted to provide their voice and expertise into this critical path. So it's really a full-fledged, hands-on deck approach. So what we've seen is really distilling down as much as we possibly can to be a foundation for a lot of these restaurants we'll get to in a second. And then I also really wanted to give a shout out to Jessica Abel, who is on our team, and she's our director, our head of projects and client experience. And she just comes with a vat of knowledge, and a lot of these her operational skill set will just shine once we start going through this critical path, which would be the majority focus of this presentation. So to kind of start things off, I think we should say who we are. Oyster Sunday, it stands for operating system. We are a hospitality service based out of New Orleans and New York. And really what we're doing is we're building a corporate office for independent restaurants, because when a lot of the team, we've had experience at, as V mentioned, at Momofuku, at the Union Square Hospitality Group. And really what we noticed was there's this amazing, when you have a corporate structure, you have all these resources from finance, accounting, marketing, branding, you name it. HR is a huge one. And in many cases that there's no reason why those same services should not be provided for independent restaurants. And so we are basically kind of reimagining what a corporate office looks like on behalf of restaurants. So we really established strategic partnerships across the industry for independent restaurants to have a voice at the table and to have economy of scale and negotiating power across things like tech. Again, bring up HR, which is a really big, concern right now, and all kinds of different departments of the industry or of the restaurants. So again, this is really our kind of what we're doing, and what our mission statement is really to reimagine the hospitality industry's business infrastructure. To kind of touch on briefly our services, I think that we are looking at this as like kind of what does it look like to build a restaurant group that's nationwide and kind of have chefs, because when a chef starts an independent restaurant, as many of the attendees on this webinar know, that there's just, when you become an owner, you become an owner operator, and you become the CFO, the CMO, the head of HR, the head facilities, everything. And a lot of those services kind of can potentially take away time to allow you to really do what you do best, and is to serve people and to be hospitable and to feed one another. And so what we're doing is building kind of where responsibilities end in a brick and mortar, our responsibilities begin. So to kind of go into what that really means concretely, let me see if I can move this a little bit. Oh, that kind of changed. So what this really means for us on a daily basis is that we're looking at, for openings, we're looking at, concept development, menu development, critical paths, which we are touching on pretty much for the full time today, and as well as the execution and project management. So the reopening critical path that we'll talk through is really pulled from an opening critical path that we've been building for months now, to think about when a restaurant has to open. But we're really considering this new reopening period as we need to be treating it like an opening. And then in terms of once doors are open, really what we're looking at is building out kind of full services. So these are a full list of services that are like branding, marketing, communications, operations, accounting, tech, and HR. And I think that's why we took those expertise and applied it to a critical path for our kind of 30,000-foot view of what a restaurant and how it can operate, even independence and not in a restaurant group. And so then, now we're looking at what, so we're going to spend most of this time again talking through this reopening critical path. And kind of we want to start with an overview of what do we have in here. So I think we start off with like, what do we know? And, there are so many variables that we don't know yet. We are going to do the best we can do to predict it. So what we did was we're trying not to be fortune tellers, decide what's going to happen. What we basically did is said, if we know these things to be true, what is as a business operator do you need to know that are fundamental, that regardless of when your doors open, what your capacity is, what your state mandates are, how do you open your doors to have your best foot forward? And we kind of turned to the critical path similarly to how we looked at when pretty much back to like March 12th or so, we're seeing it started to evolve. We were really quickly figuring out that this is real. Like this is we're about to really start seeing some ramifications of this COVID, and to what degree we don't know. And we found that a lot of people were sharing really important articles about closures and what was going on, but we did not feel that many people were addressing the fact of what information just operators need to know to make decisions. And so we kind of turned our attention to that. And so with that said, like what we know now is that, again, there's so many variables that are out there that we're not going to be able to determine. But we do know is that there's the root of every restaurant is based off of like financial stability to the best of its ability, cash flow maintenance, personnel, standard operating procedures, and we'll kind of walk through all those by department in just a second. And really this is meant to sit there and say, when doors open, are you prepared? And prepared, I put in quotes because we're making recommendations of building budgets that are 12 weeks in length. Ideally, it's going to last you for years. But the reality is that there's going to be so many curveballs that we don't know that we just recommend thinking 12 weeks out, not, and 6 months, of course, but like not confining yourself to those limitations because it's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah, so I think that's a really important point for everyone to keep in mind is that the experts are saying, you're looking at 12 weeks at a time. We're not looking at a year, 5 years, 6 months, the way that we have before. We're really looking at 12-week clips. And that first 12 week being, starting essentially now in the next 12 weeks, and then being able to recalibrate and be agile in those decisions so that toward, the end of the summer, we may be in a completely different spot. And you don't want to be so linked to what you did today that you can't pivot and continue to pivot.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think some kind of going through some bullet points concretely of what that means. And these are things that we are distilling down, is that first, this is not actually, the first couple are not included here, but first and foremost, this is going to be cyclical. We are going to go through the spring, we're going to come reopen slightly. And in terms of the lockdown, they're going to be relaxed, but they will not be fully lifted, in our opinion. This will be state mandated and partially federal. But I think every city, as we've seen, as cities started closing down and some have still not, and every city and every state has a different opinion of how much to mandate that. So this will be taken on a state-by-state basis, but we do anticipate that there will be federal implications as well around safety and around protocols. And, and in terms of like, the first bullet point that I've listed on this PDF is that, or the presentation is that first and foremost, we're not going back to normal. There is no normal.
Yeah.
We need to immediately like put that in a box, hide it, and pretend it doesn't exist anymore. Because if we're trying to build for what's coming, and we're going back to our old P&Ls, we're going back to our old inventory structure, our own menu structure, we're really doing disservice not only to the business health, but also to labor and to your clients and your guests that are coming in your door or taking out. Second, and also, food insecurity is growing. We have to address that as a food community, and there's ways in which independent restaurants can participate in that conversation and help. But I think that is only going to continue to be more of an issue, and we need to think through how food is being distributed. I think, supply chain has been disrupted as you're looking at changing your menu and we'll address this in a little bit, but as you're looking at changing your menu and adding new items, remember too that like we were first wave, and then now all the suppliers are starting to like reduce their own inventory or reducing their own distribution because of personnel. So when you're thinking about this, you've got to get out the gate early and think through how do you build those relationships and good rapport with those suppliers. We do, COVID, we need to implement even from an individual brick and mortar level to national chains. We need to be creating standard operating procedures, so SOPs, which we'll talk about a lot through this. And also we should assume that PPE, so personal protective equipment, will be mandated and for daily operations. And then some other things too are like capacity is going to reduce. We should anticipate 50% capacity at least. At most opening up for restaurants. Maybe table sizes might be reduced to, instead of 8 tops, reducing down to 4s. We should prepare for contactless payments. So thinking about prepay, thinking about contactless for your POS system. And then alternative revenue streams, which we'll get to in a second, but that's something else that we need to really be considering. At the end of the day, like as much as planning as we can do, our customers will dictate where we go and what they want. And we need to be open-eared and really, understanding what your core values are as an independent operator, but also understanding how in which to incorporate those voices into what you're serving and what you're providing. A couple more real quick is that customer acquisition is going to be unbelievably difficult. People are going to turn to digital ad buys. They're going to turn to, getting more visibility on social and other different networks. And I think that one thing we should really be looking and attuned to is who are you partnering with? How are you getting out to and we'll kind of touch on in 1 second, but like, how are you getting out to your community and to who you're serving? Because at the end of the day, they're number one and will hopefully sustain who you are. Last year, or that feeding is hyper local. So we're looking at things like, again, I kind of want to allude to the comment earlier about what's going down here in New Orleans, but there's a crew to Red Bean, which is a Red Bean themed crew for Mardi Gras, is collecting money via Venmo, is paying restaurants to produce food, and is employing musicians and other gig economy workers in New Orleans to distribute that food. And if that is a real big Venn diagram of how we're feeding, hyper local, thinking through who we're feeding, why we're feeding them, and how to get to them. And I just think that things like that, are obviously that's in response to an immediate need, but I think that hyper community, what does it mean to, be part of a community building and feeding your neighbors? What does it mean for Brigade with Dan Gusti providing food via public schools? Like that all will continue. And one last thing is I think that we're also moving from a service to a product, industry, and that's something that Shine, Daniel, and I have talked about from Agnoris a bit. Is that what does it look like when restaurants, if you're not only doing delivery, but someone like there's a 232 Bleecker in New York, when in the beginning was offering the lasagnas as like a packaged good. Like, what does it mean to be a CPG company, consumer packaged good company? What does it mean to create processes to properly mandate that, to get that out? And then most importantly, clear communication and consistent communication, both internally and externally, are just foundational for your team and for your guests.
Yeah, Elizabeth, that's all really great points. And I know something that we saw on even Kelly Fields, speaking of New Orleans, Facebook poll the other day was, what's going to make the difference in who you choose to dine out with? And trust was the number one thing. So communicating what's going on in your restaurants, what you're trying to do. You don't have to be, the most mission-driven, charitable out there person if that's not something that can work for you, or you can afford, or you're comfortable with, or is normal for you, or any of those things. Nobody's expecting that, but they just want to know authentically who you are, how you're doing, and like what's going on. And so keeping that communication is so important to building trust when folks are going to be competing for customers at the end of this.
Absolutely. And also thinking too, if you're serving a certain cuisine, someone else next to you is serving one, can you do things together to best serve your community around you?
Yeah.
I think that's also a big thing when we bring up partnerships. Right. I think that's going to be a really important. And to your point, like, you can't do everything. Stick to your core competency, right. Stick with things that you do and you do well, but make sure that you kind of go back to the fundamentals of who you are to address those questions. Kind of continue forward. So then we get to the critical path. I think that we were turning most of this conversation directly to talking about the reopening critical path, because I think it does talk about every department. That we'll go through aspects of this that aren't included in, like, that are reading between the lines in the critical path that we'll talk through. But we strongly believe that reopening is not drastically different in many departments from opening a restaurant. This is a comprehensive list that includes, onto your right-hand side, the following departments. It's really meant to address like the foundations. And, so the other, so I'm a strong believer that we kind of had two paths going forward right now. And, one is that you sprint, you get to the front of the line, you sprint, you're going out there alone. And the other one is that we're doing this and jogging with a few friends and getting there all together. And if quarantine taught me anything, is that like, this is a trying time for extroverts and I miss people, and I much prefer the second choice of those two paths. But the reason why we put this public and free was that to have a foundation for as many operators as possible to make it through this and to think through the options, I think is more valuable, and it's only as good as those you share it with. So we've made this public and free. So to kind of talk through how to use this and manage this, first and foremost, it's on our website, oystersunday.com/critical path. And then we we basically looked at, and it's also downloadable. So you can click on it and download the entire Excel. It's open source. You can address it. You can delete things, add things once you download it to address your own company. So don't feel like you're locked into all these line items. We just wanted to flush out everything that was possible. If there's anyone in your network that can
Great, and I just put that in the chat.
Oh, thank you, B. If there's anyone in your network that you think can benefit from it, share it. And if it's not relevant to V's point earlier, pass it up. Delete the task, move right along. For data inputs, just a real quick rundown: task department, category, status, owner, and then notes and resources. Notes and resources are important because beyond the task, we felt that it deserved some comments, so we did include that on the right. And then resources. Cash on hand. I think we have to start here. You know, number one is that, you know, it is important to like immediately identify your cash on hand, and it should be your number one priority. It should dictate everything because at the end of the day, this is a business, and you have to make informed decisions based off data and cash flow. So these are things that we recommend: is that you identify your cash on hand, you determine your outstanding if you have not paid vendors or vendors pay you or owe you, get those built in. And then from there, decide, you know, number one is labor, is determining. A lot of people are feeling pressure from the PPL, which I won't get into today, about the pressure to rehire. You need to make an informed decision that sometimes that 1% interest might be worth not paying people to protect them. And then you need to understand like how long you can sustain operations with the cash flow and with the budget, which we'll talk upon in just a little bit. And then you need to identify where break even is. How many people do you need in the door? How many takeouts do you need? How many things you need to get out? And from there, we believe that everything else will follow. So then we get into by section. Yeah, of course. Before I even start, all the sections are very comprehensive. They have a bunch of tasks in them. I will not walk through all of them. It is way too many, but I'm going to go ahead and do a really kind of big overview of how to read it and what things are really important per section. So bear with me. If there's questions that come up, please let us know and we'll stop. So in terms of finance, again, I'm going to start off by number one is cash on hand, identifying your cash on hand as number one. And then you really need to kind of model out. We're actually talking about modeling out 12 weeks out budgets versus 3 or 6 months or years out, because we do think that there'll be a bunch of pivots, as people keep saying, pivots and hurdles and roadblocks that are going to come up that are inevitable. So we really sit there and say, like, build out 12 weeks with the anticipation that it can last longer, but you need to do with the 12 weeks of information you have ahead of you. And then I also say, like, this is not, you know, is really kind of modeling out for the worst case. Unfortunately, you need to model for that as well as like a good case. But you need to have both in your files done. And then, you know, I think one other important thing here under operating costs is really identifying what fixed costs and negotiating those. I think this has been really well iterated by or talked about by many professionals and many people that have talked about rent abatement and, you know, reducing your POS costs and any sort of technology and renegotiating those terms. But I do think that one thing I want to call out specifically is that, particularly when it comes to rent, you know, Drew Macklin, who's our lawyer over at Klug Farber, he really made a great point that you need to, if you did receive rent relief or abatement, you need to have that documented. You need to put that in writing. You need to have that addendum to your contract, because if the building sells, if anything else happens on real estate that we do anticipate some things will happen, make sure it's documented. Make it be an email or anything, but just a phone call won't do. And then also, I think in that same breath, I mean, and the reason why I harp on rent for this is that rent is going to be a huge overhead cost, and it's, you know, it's not going away. It's a fixed cost. But I think thinking through things like, you know, can you adjust to a percentage of revenue with a base rate? So when you ebb and flow, the landlord is willing to kind of come on as a partner with you to ebb and flow with you. I think, you know, I think it's a really important thing, and identified by, you know, many people that we're talking to. In terms of operating profits, Number one rule here is identify your cushion. Know where your profits, potentially margins are. So as you're thinking about cash flow, you can kind of look at that holistically. When it comes to labor, I would say, make sure that the PPPL, if you receive PPPL, or if you're going towards a tax exemption for employees, that's being really identified and modeled in, because those things are going to affect what cash looks like at the end of the year and on a monthly basis. From a revenue stream basis, I think that, number one for revenue stream is identifying what alternatives you have. I think, and we're going to sit here for a little bit, just that, we need to be thinking about meal periods, takeout and curbside pickup. If you're going to be opting into meal kits or markets or CSAs, any of that, and also gift cards. One thing that we did publish on our website is that with gift cards and with GoFundMe's, there are tax implications of not only receiving the money and how to pull that from those, but also how to distribute. So definitely go back and we can definitely it's included in the spreadsheet, but go back and really review what those implications are for the company. And also, for when it comes to, if you are giving out gift cards, we highly recommend that, because there is really if everyone who bought a gift card comes in and uses it in the first month, you're still cash negative if you've expended that or you've given it out. So just really being mindful of, or if you create terms to your gift cards, so sit there and say, these are valid 6 months after reopening, and identifying what those terms are, I think it's very important for cash flow. And then for banking, I come back to PPPL and EIDL, communicate those lines of credit and loans with your banker, make sure that those are clear and accounted for, and maybe consider refinancing. And then I know this is a lot, but this is all, again, I want to reiterate that this is all line item by line item provided in the critical path.
Yeah, and we appreciate you going through it. We're getting a couple questions, so we are going to hold them to the end, basically on, a lot of folks didn't get PPP. They're still, going through the EIDL. And for folks who missed any of the 3 webinars that we did previously on government and the loans and whatnot, you can go back to jamesbeard.org/relief, check out demystifying government programming, the PPP specific one, and the one that we did on rent. And you should be able to, within those, get even more info.
So to kind of go from finance and really projecting is now coming down to accounting and thinking through more of bookkeeping and daily operations. I'm going to go ahead and for general accounting and re-harp on cash on hand. You need to identify it, you need to be clear, and it needs to be real crystal clear of what you have. When it comes down to sales, I think you need to rely on your data. I think we are so lucky to be living in an age where tech has really caught up finally for us, for POS systems to have really kind of more robust sales analysis that, if there's are things that are on your menu that are selling or not selling, you need to know. There needs to know how much labor is going into that. You need to know where there's redundancy of costs and redundancy of ingredients to make sure that those margins are better for you. And that really starts in the accounting side, kind of keeping tight books, particularly for AP and ARs, they're going in and out. And then when it comes down to accounts payable and accounts receivable, we're going to kind of come back to this a lot, but this is an opportunity to really understand vendor terms and payment schedules. If there is things, and back to cash flow, if there are things that allow you to have more cash at certain periods of time in the month where you'll have a crunch, it's really in thinking through negotiating those terms with your vendors. Again, we have to also recognize that they're also being pressed right now and everyone's tight. So, more goodwill, making sure all of your previous bills are paid and all that stuff's done, but it just really will, I think, help. And it should you should just have the conversations. It may not be easy and they may say no, but you should just have them.
Yeah.
And then cost of goods, very important. They need to be tight. And I'll again, kind of harping back on, really when you're thinking through, can you reuse ingredients? Can they show up multiple places? Allows you to buy in bulk and higher quantities? There's things like that. You just kind of thinking through scale that provide you, at least on that standpoint. That should be both for dining in and for delivery. And delivery we'll talk on a lot as we get closer to operations. In terms of, inventory, again, we actually recommend really thinking through forecasting demand and maybe even setting up order budgets. So on a weekly basis, like if you're exec or sous or making these orders, sous chefs are making these orders and calling those things in, is having really kind of determining what your cap is, to at least that we know we'll never exceed X, and then if there is, to be flagged.
Yeah, and something that we have heard in a couple other webinars and from other experts, in addition to the finance and accounting things that are the basics and stuff that you need to be considering here, is if you don't have cash or you don't have assets or you can't do something with paper money right now or credit, a lot of folks are going back to local growers and bartering in different ways. Like, is there something that I can do for you that pays for this good? If the restaurant provides meals to their workers that's made from the excess products, that didn't go into delivery and whatnot, making family meals for the farmers and whatnot. And so there's a lot. If there's one silver lining to this, it's the return of the human connection. And we're hearing that every single day in these webinars and from industry experts, is it really is about picking up the phone, creating that connection and saying, like, we're all kind of in the same boat. I have other values that I can put towards these goods. Is that something that works for you? And seeing if you can work out even barter arrangements with folks sometimes.
Definitely agree with that. That's a great point. Thank you. So on the operation standpoint, we'll kind of go next slide. Again, let's start with general operations. We don't know all the details. We do not know what your hours of operation are going to be. We do not know your guest capacity, but we have outlined in the general operations standpoint of what things you should be thinking about and trying to address as quickly as you can when you do reopen. And then also too about safety requirements, that are going to be set state and federally mandated. So keep an eye out. We at Oyster Sunday will also continue to monitor that and get that out as quickly as we can. But we did list out in general ops what you should keep an eye on. And then also this is going to not only affect, we'll get into communications in a little bit, but this is going to affect really how you communicate internally to your team as well as to your guests, and where you distribute that information as clearly as possible, because people are going to be turning to that as like some answers. Then we get to COVID-19 standard operating procedures, and this is even hard to know even where to start. There's so much that we need to be considering from safety, and I think that there are going to be many SOPs required to keep your team, your guests, and even also your vendors safe as they're coming in contact with your brick and mortar. And I think that transactions need to be, every touch point needs to be considered and then made standardized and then trained. And your staff needs to know what those are. They need to be clearly communicated. And also, I think there's an opportunity on the public facing side to let your guests know, if you have a website or if you have on social, and not in every detail, but to let them know that you are making precautions, because to V's point earlier, like the trust element is going to be, they need to know how to trust you. And if you don't provide them information, you can't assume they know. So make sure that that's clearly communicated. And I definitely want to give one, and in the resource section of the general operations, under the standard operating procedures, there is a couple links out to DIG. DIG has done a really great job of also making their standard operating procedures public. I would recommend looking at them. They've done a great job of delivery and all different types of them. So they are linked out on our website. So go ahead and check them out. When it comes to menu development, number one is stay lean, and your old menu will likely not work. You need to kind of go back and reevaluate and strip it down to the bare bones, and think about reduction of SKU or of line items and options. I think that's going to help not only from operations and back of house experience and also communicating that to your guests, but also going to help with cost and inventory and so on. People just need to know what they're coming for, and they don't need 1,000 options. I'm going to harp back on and listen to your data. I know that tech is sometimes some people are more comfortable with it or less comfortable with it. It's more important than ever. You have a lot of information at your hands. If you need help to start discerning what some of it means, like we are offering free consultations to any and all operators, even if we have not worked with you in the past. So feel free to reach out. And then also, when it comes to vendors, we're going to go back to this is a great time to renegotiate terms and make sure that all of your outstanding bills are paid. For ordering, we kind of listed in the critical path, like all things you need to consider ordering from food and chemicals and cleaning, but we did add in PPE, which is the personal protection equipment. If we have learned nothing from the news, is that there is very little out there, and hopefully we'll have more soon, but you do need to consider that in terms of ordering and adding that to it. And it needs to be part of your COGS. And then we get to delivery. Again, where to start? You know, I think that number one is we run your numbers. We need to consider what SKUs make most sense on definitely on a budgetary side, that there are certain dishes that are not going to be when you add in commissions and delivery fees and packaging, all of a sudden that things tick up and it's going to get very expensive, and you may deem that some things are just they can't be delivery, and you should just be able to be comfortable with that or adjust them. We do have on the delivery section of this particular tab, we have a calculator in there that was Figure 8 Logistics has done a really great job of making that calculator public, and it talks you through all kinds of different elements of packaging and kind of thinking through what those costs are. So it's a really great thing to kind of lean back on when you're unsure. And then when it comes to considering how you're delivering, you need to kind of deem like, is it going to be in-house? Is it going to be a third-party provider? And if it's in-house, you know, thinking about the future, you know, what liability looks like, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but you need to be considering who bears the responsibility of that delivery. And for third party, there's kind of like two sides. There's like a white label that you provide on your website or internally, and then there's also a lot of the third party apps that a lot of consumers are familiar with. I think that if a lot of people have really kind of come to have addressed the fact that legacy apps are really expensive and the commissions are pretty unfair to operators. And I think that it's one thing is to consider, you know, looking at both as opportunity, but understanding which one you need to prioritize. So a third party app can be a great marketing expense, thinking through if they're going to be, you know, the Grubhubs and Seamless of the world, they do allow people to be exposed to your company, that you are open in your restaurant, but you can prioritize things that have better margins for you on all other platforms, social. But I think that you just have to kind of read through where you think that break even is going to be for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that we're going to be covering more in depth is, where do you get these products? Where will you get PPE? What solutions work best to clean, to prevent the COVID virus from spreading, et cetera. And we are going to the links come out on Fridays, as y'all know, because you're here today. We have Ecolab and the ACF coming back on Tuesday at 2 p.m. They're going to do a very deep critical dive on what products work, where you buy them, how we'll be sourcing them, what the sanitation procedures will look like, what the new food handler's license will look like. And like, spoiler alert, you want to sign up for this one because ACF is giving away a free code to take the class. So that'll be Tuesday. So we'll cover all of that later. And when it comes to ordering and delivery, that's something that we could also spend a full day on, and we likely will. So if you have any questions about those topics, we'll continue to talk more about those and how they are not affecting your business.
Thank you. The next section is HR. This is gonna be the last one we spend a fair amount of time on. The rest we'll kind of do overviews. And for HR, I think the one thing to first off address is new policies. Again, the Beard Foundation has done an exceptional job of really talking through the PPPL and employee retention tax credits. I won't harp on that or talk about it, but I think that we just go back and listen to them. They're very comprehensive. But the one thing for the sake of this, and I know tomorrow Empowered Hospitality is going to come on and talk through a lot of HR, but just really thinking through Family First Corona Response Act, the FFCRA, which is an extension of the Family Leave Act. And so I just think that when it comes to this, there's going to be new protocols you need to put in when onboarding in hiring. And I think that there's, you know, in terms of like what leave looks like. So just really, I would recommend coming on and listening to that. There's gonna be a lot to be added, and we do have resources again in the critical path that have PDFs to talk through it, but it'd probably be very helpful. You know, in terms of recruitment and hiring, I mean, there's a lot of questions about, you know, what are the implications of PPL on how to hire, and then also, you know, if employees are on unemployment and you offer them a job, they don't accept for several reasons, are they discredited for unemployment? These things are still fleshing out. But the one thing to say is that when you are recruiting and hiring, and we do talk upon it for benefits section here as well, is that you need to be thinking about retention, thinking about what does it mean to reinstate benefits quickly? What does it mean to reinstate tenure for when it comes to paid time off and things of that nature? Can you offer things like referral programs to get people in the door when you do have available slots? Really thinking through what does benefits look like? Because, and of course, we should address health benefits. We should address a lot of different types of benefits. For the sake of this conversation, we're really addressing what is an added benefit for an employee to come back. Profit share, ownership, things of that nature. So we have outlined those. And then when it comes to like training, it's like making sure that your procedure, all your policies are included in your handbooks. If you don't have handbooks, considering building them from a compliance side. If you have questions about handbooks, contact us. We can definitely help you think through that. And then, you know, payroll. I mean, there's just a lot. Payroll should be considered, you know, new policy inclusion. What does time off look like? All that needs to be included, and those, and even in the offer letters and your payment negotiations, all that needs to be on the table. So when it comes to HR, there's so much. We've done our best to address what paperwork you need, what you need to be thinking through, and there's a lot of great resources that are out there right now that people have circulated for free, and many of which we have incorporated onto our critical path. So definitely take a look.
Fantastic. Yeah, and tomorrow we have Sarah Deal with Empower HR coming to talk about both the new HR practices that Elizabeth is referring to here, as well as ways to stay engaged with your employees while they're furloughed or laid off, and then what employee welfare looks like coming back. A lot of folks are obviously going to be very concerned about, you know, especially if you're a public-facing position, and how to navigate that, create trust and policies that protect both your staff and yourself, but also other diners. So tomorrow at 2, all things HR and employee welfare.
From communications, we've touched on this. The most important part is that clear, concise, direct, and swift communication is absolutely, like, it's just crucial. In this, we've identified things that you should consider talking to your staff about and your team and talking to diners about. So definitely check it out. And then also what should be included in your website and social media. But again, can't stress enough the importance of clear communication in this time period.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have so many questions, Elizabeth.
Oh, really?
So it looks like we've got 2 more places. So marketing, and then we're going to go to technology, and then we'll do questions in about 5 minutes. So everyone who's asking questions, we will get to them, I promise, even if we run a little over.
And I'll just touch on actually compliance, tech, and facilities all together. The most important part for technology and facilities is that is really kind of reduce your rates and think about payment structure and thinking about going back to your vendors similar to ordering. Really have a clear communication with those vendors about what you need and what's viable for you to stay in operation. So I would recommend just getting on the phone, talking to them, renegotiating those contracts, and even thinking through what can you always ask, you're not doing redundant work. And then when it comes to compliance, we anticipate that there are going to be new requirements and risk management procedure that's going to come out of this, and new insurance policies are going to come from this, particularly as people like Thomas Keller have gone and sued their insurance companies for not being covered in business disruption. So keep an eye out. We'll continue to monitor it and get it out on our website and resources. But for the sake of this, is a comprehensive list of things you should consider that could be mandatory or added value to protect your company. And the one last thing I'll say on this is we do have the critical path for your review. So check it out. We'll circulate this deck after. And then lastly, you know, at Oyster Sunday, we sincerely believe that information is not only powerful, but it's crucial to facing the uncertainty and to find a path forward. So we are continuing to offer since early March free consultation. If you have any questions, you get us on the phone. We'll answer anything we can. If we don't know, we're going to find an answer. We'll find great people that have offered their services for free. So definitely get in touch, and please feel free to share this as widely as possible, because we hope it's a a real big value to help people find answers and to know their blind spots. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I feel like I want to clap for you. That was so thorough and
you.
so thoughtful. And the comments have all been like, this is so helpful. This is so helpful. And so I just want to say, truly, we appreciate so much. One, you putting this out here for free for everybody and building these tools, but also just like sharing so candidly, like, you know what, things aren't going to be the same. And there's some good things that can come from that not being the same. We can rebuild differently in a way that serves us better. We can take a hard look at the, cost of doing business and the ways that we like to feed people and recognize that at the heart of it, our desire to feed people has not changed. It's just going to be the method by which we do. Maybe it won't be white tablecloths, crowded dining rooms, turning tables like we used to. Maybe it'll be something that we're, bringing more of our food into people's homes, or maybe we're seeing fewer people in a day, but we're having a more meaningful relationship with them and rebuilding those local communities. And
Totally
I think that's
agree.
so powerful.
And I think that we can find ways to feed one another in really interesting ways. And in knowing too that this might be temporary or it may be integrated into your business model, but recognizing the fact that like we have to adjust now, going back to where it was, it's not an option. And I think you should see this as a creative time to be able to figure out and know you're not alone. There's a lot of people that want to give these services and provide feedback. And so ask. Yeah. Thank you, V. Appreciate that.
And absolutely, as we're building out our CPG projects, or we're building out like our, villaging at home situations, those products that you're building out right now, while they feel clunky or not part of the vision you originally had, those are going to be assets later. When we do, in a year from now or whenever it is, get back into being able to serve people in a traditional dining room environment, albeit with different SOPs and whatnot, you're still going to be able to have those SKUs and those abilities to say, we never thought we could do takeout, and now we do, and this is what that looks like, and here's our to-go lasagna, and here's our J&E sausage kit where you can take this and have an upscale griller at home. And so all the things that you're investing in right now are not going to be a waste. They're going to be something you're going to be able to continue to build in your portfolio, and eventually will help you scale and achieve greater national recognition for the work that you're doing and the creativity that you have. So kind of keep that in mind too, that what we're working on today is something that we won't be throwing away later. It's not a waste of time. It's maybe not the ideal of what you thought you were going to do, but it's something that can keep you afloat now and that can be extra money later, which will be great.
Totally.
One place that I want to talk about is the off-prem. We've talked a lot about restaurants, and that's our core thing at the Beard Foundation, is the independent restaurant, of course. But we also work with a ton of people who are in the festival circuit. They're in the off-premise catering. They're in ticketed events, places like Rose Mansion, who's on the call now as well. Like, what is your projection for folks who are operating in that arena? What do you think they can be doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that particularly with understanding that this will likely be cyclical and we may have another upswing in the fall, I think people are going to be risk averse, if nothing else, because of just thinking through the liability and thinking through, I think I do envision that we will be holding on major events exceeding X amount of people. I don't know what X is going to be yet, and it may be mandated city by city or federal. I'm assuming city by city, to be honest, or state by state.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. But I do think that in terms of, there are people that are doing great stuff of like kind of, again, using the word pivoting, but like changing their path. So for example, Cherry Bomb did a fully digital Jubilee in lieu of doing it in person. How that can be help your business on kind of the bottom line, we'll have to figure out. I think there's innovative ways of doing that, of content, but I would envision that, consider it won't be in person likely until 2021.
And likely really summer 2021, because not a lot of those events take place in the winter, and we're hearing that both from the arts and music side of things too, that you're looking at probably July 2021 before people are comfortable, or before insurance feels comfortable even underwriting the ability to let that many people gather together. And so these are all things that are kind of out of our hands, but truths that if we recognize them now, we can pivot. And I know many of the folks who I'm seeing on the attendee list, hello, Chef Angela Rayner, are also went to Jubilee and had an incredible time. I was just as engaged as I would have been in person. I had side group texts going. People, this is the new normal for people. It's something that maybe didn't work for you before with trying to do a digital event. Folks are really into it now, so it's definitely worth a try. And with the off-premise catering, I think we can talk about pivoting as well to these to-go orders. Can you be soliciting contracts for hospitals? Can you be soliciting contracts for fire departments, et cetera, the emergency workers? They have budgets to feed folks. And what we heard in previous calls is it is a cold call. It's calling up your local fire department and saying, hey, I'm, this caterer and I want to make these meals and this is what I can do menu-wise. And they have state budgets to feed their emergency workers. And that's how folks are getting that. Or, maybe you never had a brick and mortar because you were an off-premise caterer and this is your opportunity to get into people's homes with your food and share that experience. Caterers are exceptionally talented at putting things into go and like, how do you reheat this? This might be an excellent opportunity to have that at-home experience with people as well. The wedding industry is going to have to come back soon. If you start feeding them now, you never know.
Absolutely.
The other question that we have for you is, in thinking about people who didn't get PPP or are considering if it comes out again, should they apply for it even? Or with the fact that we can't really rehire our staffs right now, is it better to put our eggs in a different basket and sort of chase a different kind of funding?
Man, yeah, one thing with people, those who are not applying or did not receive PPL, a lot of times we're hearing, or we have been telling, or not telling, but like offering the option of applying for EIDL, SBA loan for damage to your company, and then thinking through tax exemption. I think for employment, I think the one thing you have to consider, and I harp on it again, is cash on hand. If you have cash on hand, that can be a really great option because it allows you to the PPPL is contingent on the amount of headcount you have. If you aren't able to employ, and I do not recommend unless your budget says to employ fully, to employ that. If you've got a PPL, you can't employ fully. You have to be, you have 24 months to pay off the 1% interest, which is deferred. But I think that at the end of the day, that also for cash could be a great choice. You should use the PPL for what it's meant for. But if you do receive one and you can't hire, remember that a 1% interest on a loan is also cash in the bank that you can keep your business afloat and make the strategic decisions you have to on behalf of your business.
Yeah, not so bad. Something that we were talking about yesterday, and we also have a couple questions here is, we're city gals. I'm here in New York City. You're down in New Orleans. A lot of our chefs and restaurateurs are in LA, Chicago, major cities. And a lot of the media coverage is, tends to lean towards the city. A lot of the big splashy restaurants lean toward the city. And with the fact that we're not going to be able to open, as quickly as some of the more rural markets, the food journalists yesterday were saying 100% yes, there will be a shift where a lot more attention is going to the rural market that's opening first and sort of bigger cities taking their lead from that, or the media, if you want to cover something, then you got to go where they can be open. What do you think the opportunity for booms in rural communities will be during this time?
Absolutely. I think that's a really pointed point. And on top of first off, yes, I think that we'll learn a lot from how they're addressing these issues, how they're coming back online, what they're choosing to do. I also kind of want to extrapolate a little bit further and say that we also should turn to countries that are coming online sooner. I think we'll learn a lot from other countries, such as like in Asia and in Europe. And as they start coming online, I think that we need to glean information from all points of view. But to answer your question directly, I definitely think that rural communities will. I think they'll be able to, if we've learned nothing else, like to serve your community and to do that in those contexts. Like, I think there's a lot to be taken from that playbook of what does it mean to actually be a community or neighborhood restaurant. Some brick and mortars in major cities will have to reevaluate what that core principle is for them if it wasn't previously part of their mission.
There was a trend just before this happened, in the last year or so, where folks were getting rid of tipping and they were going into just service charge. This is what it costs us to do this food and treat our people right. Do you think this is an opportunity where we're going to see more restaurants moving to that model and away from tipping?
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity. I think the door's wide open. I think it's harder. But I do think that with people that, and some cities don't have it. Like, I think actually Takeaway Only, the podcast, did a really great episode with talking about, with talk and talking about service charge. And some cities can't manage that. It's like illegal now because of certain stipulations. So I think there will be some cities that can adapt it quicker and already have. But I do think that this does open the door for different types of revenue stream and more transparency to the consumer. I think the consumer understands now. I mean, restaurants make up 4% of the GDP. That's crazy. If we aren't, and this is going to only have more ripple effects as things shutter and real estate gets affected, unemployment gets affected. And I think the consumer is now more informed than ever about commission charges. And so when you add that in, it has more context. I would never will this upon anyone to have this happen, to have that context, but at least the door is wide open to be able to at least communicate and prove why. Like here's numbers, like not even just our opinion. And also you'll have a leaner staff. I mean, you have to have a leaner staff and you can pay them better.
Right.
And I think thinking through what roles are of your team is going to shift. Can we go to salary?
Absolutely.
Can we provide benefits? Can we see them as full-time employees? Like hopefully, like exempt versus non-exempt, So hopefully we just keep pushing this, shake it all up, reimagine it, and start over,
What advice do you have for folks who were set to open in March or April and who now can't, and maybe they've sunk some cost into equipment and into hiring, folks who won't be able to start? What options do they have right now?
My first thought is immediately go to fixed cost, reduce it, get talk to your landlord, and just in general, I know probably the question you're asking is more about consumers and like how to get customer base when you open, but I would say immediately you've got to get those fixed costs down to be able to make it through, because we don't know how long this is going to last and we don't know when it's going to happen again. It will happen again. And I think that in terms of customer acquisition, I think, maybe it's hard. I don't know. I think that you haven't opened.
We don't know.
I mean, wait to offer things that your customer wants. Listen, read, inform yourself, build. You have a chance right now while you're not in operation to build all these processes that can at least allow you to weather the storm in the future. And I think that it could be an opportunity. We've been working with restaurants to open for the fall in summer and fall that we're now on pause. And we're really kind of taking it day by day to identify what does the world look like then? And we should not make we should talk about how your pass is set up. Do they need to be 6 feet apart? Do stations need to be distanced? Are there new protocol for construction? All these things need to be identified before you move forward. And it depends on where you are in that cycle, for sure.
So
I'm not sure they
don't
answer
wait,
questions
ask
directly.
questions. It did.
Okay.
Don't wait, ask questions now, negotiate things now that you can, understanding that you're probably going to be pushed back further than obviously you expect it to be, but you may have some leverage in that space. We have a question about, there's been some cool stuff that's happened because of COVID. It's the hospitality industry. You can get to-go cocktails now here in New York City and various other places. You can, people who weren't doing to-go are. There's some restrictions that have been lifted on even the brewery and the spirits industries to be able to do some different things. How do we keep those things after this? Some people want to keep those freedoms. Is there something we could do with that?
Move down to New Orleans.
We
got cocktails going on. No, I mean, I think they'll ebb and flow. I think it depends too on the culture of the state, who's governing it, where I think a lot of those things will affect the decision making whether or not to keep it open, and in what sense. I love the fact there's more to go cocktails. I love being able to boomerang a cocktail and leave it on someone's porch in a glass of a bottle of wine and pick it up from someone I love, go drop it on their stoop. I mean, there's no other little surprise and delight that you can offer right now. I hope that some of these things stay. I hope that you can do delivery with wine to purchase for an upsell. I think that your margins will be better than ever. I think that you're sitting on inventory that needs to be consumed. And if this goes on for a year, your rosé from 2020 or 2019 consumed in 2020 is now 2021. Get it out the door. It's not good sitting. So I hope that we find solutions around that. And that we become more innovative, and that maybe again this kind of shakes things up, that what was previously traditional or legal is now not legal, traditional or mandated is now shifting. Yeah,
we talk a lot about from the restaurant the owner perspective, and we do have a couple questions here from people who are employees, chefs of institutional establishments like a school or something like that will likely be getting back into operation sooner than a restaurant maybe would be, because they can control that experience more. Or even commissary kitchens, stuff like that. what advice do you have for people who are going back to work in places? Like what should they be looking out for themselves and their safety?
Man, yeah, I think it depends on the city and what your
Yeah.
transportation is. I mean, number one is keep confined and wear a mask for yourself and
Mhm.
for others. I mean, I think that we don't know what the air transmittability of this is. There's talk about being in air conditioning and ducts. I think just being diligent about not only protecting yourself, but also like you're doing it for others. Like remembering that we're in a
Right.
society, we're part of a community. Um, and I think that you have to have a gut check that if you're living with people, like say you're living with family that is maybe older in age, or you're living with children, or you're living with someone who's immune deficient, like making that judgment call for you and finding alternatives, that if you have to go back to work, and obviously this is contextualized in the sense that if you have a work that requires you to be in person, you take all the precautions you can with PPE and making sure
Yeah.
that you're thinking through commute schedules, that you maybe it's not on a high time, you're going down on a low time of like commuting. If you don't have to do that, considering what does it mean to, not putting people in harm's way, and like what does it mean to find a balance between in person and remote.
Yeah,
I think a lot of
absolutely.
restaurant companies are doing more remote at this point. It may that I
Yeah.
do think will be here to stay.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I've gotten quite cozy here in my cello studio slash webcasting office. Um,
Yeah.
Another thing, and Desmond brings up an excellent point. We have Ashley Koziak from our team and Megan Storms, who are on our advocacy and chef impact team, auditing this call. They're listening to everything, taking notes that goes back into the work that we're doing to advocate for restaurant rights and for restaurant fairness and equity with, the legislators in DC and in your local communities. If you've not gotten involved on that side of things, go to jamesbeard.org/relief. There's a place there for the Chef Action Toolkit. You can reach out to impact@jamesbeard.org at any time if you have any more questions about how do I talk to my representatives, or how do I talk to my mayor even about how this is affecting me and what things we need in place and what help we need. There's a whole team here at Beard that is on the front lines of that. So when it comes to workers' rights or rent abatement, anything that really is going to technically kind of get passed through federal or major states when people are going to open and whatnot, if you're curious about any of that, we have tons of information on there, and Ashley has been absolutely incredible with Megan and Catherine Miller and the rest of the team on that side, just getting all that info to people. So please visit us there. That concludes our time, and we did go 5 minutes over. And Elizabeth, I feel like we could have talked for another hour on all these different details. So I want to remind everyone to follow Elizabeth at Oyster Sunday. And then what is the website again? It was oystersunday.com. That's where you're going to find the resources / critical path. But even if you go to oystersunday.com, there's tons of information there, and we put that into the chat. Reach out to her, hello@oystersunday.com, with any more questions you have, especially on those very, very generous free advice sessions that she'll be offering. We thank you so much for coming and offering us all this information today, for taking time out of your day to join us, everyone who is an attendee. This will be sent out to all of you. It's also on our website, jamesbeard.org/relief. You can go there, that's the easiest one, or /industry-support-webinars. We have all the recordings of all the ones before, including today, and everything that we have coming up. I know a lot of folks are interested in what's coming up. You can email us at impact@jamesbeard.org to get on that mailing list. That goes out every Friday with what the next week's webinars will be and all of the information about how we're doing in advocacy. So I want to thank you again, Elizabeth. Thank you everyone for the call. Stay well. We will stay in touch. We're doing the best we can. We know you are too, and we hope you have a safe rest of the week. We'll see y'all soon.
Thank you.